Hello everyone, welcome to our Truth Be Told YouTube channel, with your host Rick Howard and Mike Maney.
Hello everyone out there. Welcome to another thrill-seeking, thrill-fulfilling, thrill something.
Drill something.
Okay, people are already going to turn off this video, that opening line. Welcome to another session of Truth Be Told. Today is January the 17th, 2024. So we just woke up with a new year and it's already halfway through the month. And here in Modesto, California, my name is Rick Howard, pastor of the Liberty Missionary Baptist Church in Modesto. We had a nice rain last night. It's about 60 degrees today, which is kind of warm for the middle of January. And I usually always look at the weather in Missoula before I come on, and I froze to my bones when I looked at it. You're in the midst of a snowstorm today, aren't you?
It's snowing right now. Yeah.
Single digits?
No, it's actually warmed up. It's 17 now.
I noticed, I think you told me this last Saturday, it was like minus 22.
Yeah.
Now, that was just the temperature. I don't know what the wind chill was. And you said you had to get up that morning and get in your pickup truck to go somewhere, and the battery was dead.
Yes.
And so you had to go down to the auto parts store or wherever and buy a new battery. And you had to put it in yourself? Or
Yeah.
I just had a battery die in my car, and the auto parts store took out the old one and put in the new one right there in the parking lot.
Oh, well, because it wouldn't start, I had to leave my truck in the driveway. So I just,
Yeah, you couldn't call it. Yeah, no.
remove the battery, take it down there. They call it a core, as you know. So it's an exchange, an $18 core. And so I bought the battery and then drove back. I'm using Vicky's car, so I drove back to put that in. And I've got just a few minutes to do this.
You said something about frostbite on your hands or something?
Yeah, it'll turn into that if I don't hurry. And so
Really?
I've got just a few minutes.
Which of course makes you mess up more, trying to use a wrench and take off bolts and
I had
in the freezing weather.
When I took that out, I got everything, all the tools I needed, and I got it ready in the garage. Got the tools, opened up the hood, and got that battery out of there, disconnected the cables, and then ran down to the store and then left the tools all out. Okay, so when I got back, I plopped that thing in there and hooked it all back up. I got just a few minutes before my fingers are going to just freeze off. So I was hurrying, but I got it
started. To that day, was it?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh.
So, yeah, when it's that cold, you don't have a big window, But it's warmed up now. It's 17 above, so we're getting there.
Well, I guess you're not alone in many other parts of the country right now. There's quite a freeze going on.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. So
anyway, I'm glad you still have your fingers with you.
Yes.
It seemed like it turned your hair a little bit grayer too.
Yes, that's from worrying. I need to get this in.
Today is session 88.
88 already.
Pushing 100 almost.
Yes, we are.
And of course, we thought we'd be all the way through the Old Testament by session 88. We're still in the book of Numbers. But we're in no hurry. And, we already had to go backwards a few chapters because Braden Barnum took us to task.
Yes, he did.
And showed us some things we overlooked. So we did that last session. And I'm glad he did, because it was a good session, I thought. Good types of Christ. And we've been promising you, even though for most people, I think the story of Balaam and Balak, people's eyes cross. They start thinking about what they're going to have for dinner or something,
Sure.
Because it's a fairly long story for two obscure figures in the larger story. And it seems, for for what it is, it seems to go on and on and on. You're trying to unravel all the details. What's this got to do with God's plan, his prophetic plan, his people Israel? What's it got to do with Christ? And so as we get to it today, we're going to see one of the most beautiful prophecies of Christ is from this mystery prophet, we call him, Balaam. And he comes from Mesopotamia. That's in Deuteronomy, I think. Says he's from Mesopotamia, 23 and 4. 22 and 5 of Numbers also indicates that he's from out of the area. So if he was, in fact, from Mesopotamia, that's interesting because that's where Abraham came from originally.
Yes.
And now a mystery prophet from that same area is hired to curse the descendants of Abraham. So it's kind of like Abraham's past is coming back to haunt him. Like someone from the area he grew up in and left. And so now they're a few years out of Egypt, Moses and Israel. They had the Kadesh story of the 12 spies, so we're past that. And so now they have 38 more years for a total of 40 to wander around. And if you look at any of the maps that are readily available, a lot of you have them in the back of your Bibles, you'll see that that 38 years was spent in what is called the Sinai Peninsula, the wilderness of Paran, the wilderness of Zin, the area of Edom, and then Moab and Ammon as they worked their way up to cross over the Jordan. And that's very fascinating to me, very fascinating even in a larger prophetic sense. I recorded my session number 40 last night of my end time studies that I do twice a month here at Liberty, and then send those out. And on a separate YouTube channel. So if you want information on that, we'll try to include it in the description, maybe connection to my end time videos. But it's interesting that God brought them through because of their failure at Kadesh, where they could have went in from the south directly up. God made them wander for 38 more years. Where? In Edom, which is Esau, Moab and Ammon, which are the two sons of Lot by incest. And then Genesis 21:21 says that Ishmael settled down in this area. So there's something there that I've never quite grabbed hold of. Maybe you have. Others who watch this, maybe you've developed this in your mind. It's still fairly fresh as far as this part goes. I never really thought this part through, that is there a reason? Did God have a purpose that he wanted their wanderings for 38 years to be in the land of Esau, Ishmael, Moab, and Ammon, of people who ended up being Israel's enemies, but also their blood kin, not receiving the firstborn blessing and birthright. So they felt rejected and dejected in some ways. They've had animosity. The book of Ezekiel calls it the ancient hatred. Because you have an ancient hatred, you're now trying to harm my people. And for some reason, God wanted them to wander in the lands of Esau, Ishmael, and Lot's descendants. There's something there. Have you ever thought about that?
Well, no, I hadn't, but now that you brought it up, a thought did occur to me. And I hadn't thought of this before until just now. But if we want to make kind of an application to ourselves, God has us live in and among people around us so that we can be an influence.
Mm.
And so maybe because they had the birthright, because they had the promises through Abraham, that he had them wander in that area, ever giving them a chance, perhaps, to agree, to latch on to believe. And so he had them just, keep closely associated in that area, but an opportunity to just, surrender and believe.
To be a witness to some of their blood relatives.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, when they went into Canaan, he wanted Israel to wipe them out because their sin had become so great.
Mm-hmm.
But during these 38 years, are blood relatives of Israel. And I think you're onto something, that during that 38 years, he wanted those peoples to see how God led them and blessed them and provided.
Yeah.
I mean, God was raining manna down daily for them to eat.
Mm-hmm.
God was providing water for them to drink.
Mm-hmm.
Their clothes did not wear out. Their sandals did not wear out.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're wandering around for 38 years in the areas of your blood relatives who kind of have some animosity towards you, and they see this,
Yes,
then they would recognize that the God of these people, there must be something to him. Even though they have no permanent dwelling place, they are kind of wandering around, and even they were witnessing God's judgment on Israel, because it was during these 38 years that an entire generation died.
mm-hmm.
And it was their children that got to go in. But even seeing God's judgment on them would be a witness.
Mm-hmm.
And so you may be right there. God often has dual or even multiple purposes in what he's doing.
Another thought was that they would see God's character. You're right, that he judged them for their own wrongdoing. So they saw his balanced character. It wasn't just all for them and never a punishment when they messed up. But because another thought was that maybe because the relatives never did give any homage to Israel for being the blessed seed line. Here comes Balak, and he sees the blessings of these people. So he brings out but the relatives wouldn't bring out. He brings out the blessing that God has for these people.
Yeah, because well, yeah, you're right. It's kind of like what Paul said in Romans 11. It's important to see both the goodness and the severity of God.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And these people were seeing that as God dealt with Israel. And then God also gave Israel victory over any of them who tried to fight against them. Mm-hmm. And so that would also be a witness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So during this 38 years, God was also working in the peoples of Edom, Moab, and Ammon, blood relatives of Israel, maybe for their salvation.
Mm-hmm.
At least the ones who, there could have been, like later in Jericho with Rahab, there could have been a lot of individuals within these nations that had the outlook of Rahab.
Mm-hmm.
We know God is with you. Please take care of me, my family.
Mm-hmm.
We believe that he's the true God.
Yeah.
There could have been a number of those
mm-hmm.
if they had allowed God's grace to work on them. And we don't really have examples of that too much, but that certainly would have been a real possibility.
Well, other nations like Nineveh, or cities like Nineveh, they could have responded like Nineveh at the preaching
Mm-hmm.
of the Hebrews.
A wholesale repentance.
Yeah.
Mm.
But because of the ancient, how'd you say it? The ancient
hatred.
They just were holding on to that.
Hatred.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then another thing I notice, and this is also from my end time lesson last night, because my lesson last night was the true triumphal entry.
Mm.
And I've developed this conclusion that Christ is going to have a second triumphal entry. The first one failed because they had rejected the chief cornerstone, even though they said the right words. They said the words they were supposed to say when their Messiah came. Psalm 118. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna, save us, we pray. They said the right things. They were rejoicing. They were cheering. They were waving. They were doing all the right things. But Jesus knew in just a few days, some of those same people would be saying, crucify him, crucify him.
Yeah, yeah.
So he rejected their attempt to bring it about by the flesh. And in the second coming, of course, they're going to be converted. They're going to repent. They're going to be forgiven of their great offense that they committed at his first coming. And he's going to, and where are they when that happens? Well, looking at the map I'm looking at of the traditional route of the Exodus, at the top of the Gulf of Aqaba, you have about halfway between that and the Dead Sea, you have Petra. And Petra is the ancient hiding place of Israel several times in their history when they had to be on the run and hide out and try to fight and defend themselves in a well-fortified place. Petra would be it. There's lots of mountains. It's really rugged country. It's hard to fight against anyone entrenched in that area. And I think that whole general area is going to be where Israel is in the wilderness, because Daniel 11, I think it's verse 41, says that when the Antichrist tries to take over that whole area, God's going to make sure that Edom, Moab, and Ammon are protected. And so God's going to make sure that the Antichrist is not able to do a lot of damage in those areas. And I think a big part of the reason is because that's where that 1/3 of Israel is going to be down there in the wilderness, protected by God. And then when Jesus comes back, and I know this is a kind of a different line of thinking than maybe what we've had over, most years. I had this in my mind that Jesus, according to Zechariah 14:4, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives. And what the two men said at the ascension, he's going to return in like manner, that his feet, the first place his feet would touch would be the Mount of Olives, and then he'd march into Jerusalem. But now I see a process of time and events of maybe days or weeks that may address that mysterious 1335 days at the end of Daniel, where Isaiah 63 says, who is this who comes from Bozrah? Who is this who comes from Edom?
And he's leading a procession, isn't he?
And he's leading a procession. So now I have more in mind that the first part of his return is down there, because that's where they're going to be regenerated. And he's not, so he's in the sky and they see him and they believe, he's not going to say something like, okay, fellas, now that you're saved, I'll see you in a few weeks up in Jerusalem, find your way up there.
Right.
He brings the saints with him. He brings his angels with him. He has redeemed Israel with him. And, he's coming from Edom and Bozrah. So you got to get him down there at some point. And I think that's the beginning of a combination of defeating his enemies along the way, just like Moses and Joshua and Israel did. And then it turns more into a royal procession, because he's going to come to Zion, several scriptures say. And so he marches up and he crosses over the Mount of Olives, down into Jerusalem. And I conjectured last night, I could be way off on all this, but I'm thinking now that may answer that question, that puzzle that all of us have. Why does it say, blessed is he who comes to the 1335? And I'm thinking the 1335th day may be the day he walks into the eastern gate into Jerusalem at the end of that royal procession that has been going on for either 45 days or 75 days. And he's working his way up to Jerusalem in a victorious, triumphal entry with his people following behind.
What do you think? Maybe retracing some earlier steps 2,000 years prior? I mean, I always thought his feet shall touch on Mount Olives. So I pictured him coming down and his feet touching on the way down, but it doesn't necessarily mean a touchdown. It just, he eventually finds his feet.
See, here's where our mind is. I've always read that Zechariah 14:4 as saying his feet will land on the Mount of Olives.
That's how I pictured it. Yeah.
Stand.
Right. He'll just be there. He'll stand there.
So at some point he's going to stand on the Mount of Olives,
yes.
but it does not technically say that's where he lands.
Right. Right.
And I'm thinking that's the last place he stands before he enters Jerusalem at the end of the processional march.
Yeah.
So if you want to know more details, you got to watch the video. Pay $19.95 to watch the video.
Is that with commercials or without commercials?
I'm giving you a teaser so that you'll buy the rest.
Wow.
That's what I dealt with last night. There's a number of great passages in the Old Testament that seems to describe it. In fact, one even uses the Old King James says goings, but all the New King James and modern translations say procession, actually uses the word procession as connected to his coming, defeating his enemies. It uses the idea of procession. And so, when he did say in Matthew 23:39, you'll not see me again till you say again, basically, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And they'd already said it in the first triumphal entry that was a failed attempt. This one will succeed. And the fact that they will say it, I think also implies everything connected to it. So when they saw him coming into Jerusalem riding a donkey, they knew it was a fulfillment of Zechariah 9:9. The rest of Zechariah 9 goes on to describe the triumphal entry and victorious procession to make himself king. And there's a number of passages that deals with this, that why did the Jews react like they did when they saw him riding on the donkey? Because they knew it was a fulfillment of Zechariah 9:9, and then Zechariah 9:10 immediately turns into what we call second coming language, his victory over his enemies. So they expected the rest of that to be fulfilled, but he knew their hearts were not right. So he didn't allow the rest of it to be fulfilled at that time. It's going to happen in the future.
I was thinking that they wanted him as king without being their savior. And the second go around, they're going to receive him as their savior out there at Petra. Because he's going to deliver them. Then once they get the savior part down, then they go marching in with him as their king. So it'll be completely flipped.
And he will be the greater Moses, leading them in that march. And then he will also become the greater Joshua, conquering them and entering into the land. And I conjectured again. My wife says I conjecture too much. I try to use my imagination. But in the map I'm looking at, the top of the map is right at the top of the Dead Sea, right directly Jerusalem, and then directly east of that, the Jordan River and Mount Nebo. And so it's really pretty beautiful and emotional if you think about it, because I've said throughout my ministry how sad it is that Moses didn't get to enter the promised land.
Mm.
He got to see it. He died right outside of it. He's buried there. No one knows where his body is. Maybe one reason, and I know God can overcome someone stealing a body. I mean, it's just bones now, not even bones maybe. But one purpose of that may be, as he travels up from the wilderness, leading them in this procession, and he's getting ready to cross over Jordan, cross the Mount of Olives into Jerusalem, he stops at Mount Nebo. He says, we got one more person to pick up here.
Oh,
Come on,
yes.
Moses.
Yes.
Now you get to enter in.
Right. Yeah.
And so that adds a beautiful element of when you say, oh, it's so sad he didn't get to go into the promised land. Well, he'll get to go in. He just has to wait a while.
Yes.
And then he's going to walk right on in with the rest of the saints.
Yeah.
So that's going to be great.
Yeah.
So I really think that you look at a map that shows where their journey was on the east side of the Dead Sea and up and then across. I mentioned this last night too. I don't mean to be repeating the whole lesson last night, but it really ties in with where we are in the book of Numbers. When Jesus came down from Galilee to Jerusalem for the last time, and what we call the Triumphant Entry took place, what happened in the few days leading up to that? How did he get down there? Well, he traveled the real common path of going over into the east side of the River Jordan. And there's a road that goes all the way down. And then you cross over. And where do you cross over at? Where did he enter and heal blind Bartimaeus on his way down from Galilee to Jerusalem for the last time? It was in Jericho. So he crossed over at the same place Israel crossed over. And what's the first place he went to after he crossed over? Jericho, just like they did, the first place they conquered. So there's something there in all of this that Jesus did repeat and will repeat the same path that they took. And I just think it all fits. It makes sense because this whole Exodus, wilderness, conquering, inheriting string of events that take place in that order is a repeating theme throughout the scriptures. That whole Exodus wilderness theme is repeated often in the Bible. And I tend to believe that it will literally happen that way at his return.
You know, and adding to that, Brother Rick, if there's going to be sacrifices in the millennial reign to show Israel what everything was pointing to, if that's the purpose, then it only makes sense that he's really replaying the whole video. You know, I mean, he's replaying, he's pushed rewind, and he's going over these areas to give them a visual, and then couple that, I mean, in person, but now with a whole different mindset. It's like their eyes have been enlightened.
Yeah, we know Moses is one of the great types of Christ. And we know Joshua is a great type of Christ, and Joshua and Jesus being the same name. It makes sense that he will take on that role of a combination of Moses and Joshua and literally lead his people up from the south along that same path and cross over just like Israel crossed over. And so when he stands on the Mount of Olives, Zechariah 14:4, that may be the end of that several weeks or whatever it is procession, not the start of it. I mean, the question I ask is, you know, at first that sounds so different than what we'd always pictured in our mind. But my question is, at some point at his return, Isaiah 63, who is this that comes from Edom and from Bozrah? I take that to literally be true. That's Jesus coming from those geographic places. At some point, you got to get him there.
Well, not only that, he's got a blood-stained robe. And so what's going on with that?
Well, Isaiah 63:4 says it's the blood of, it's their blood of his enemies.
Mm-hmm.
So he comes as a warrior. It's interesting that Revelation 17:14, when it describes the saints coming with him that are called, chosen, faithful, he uses a military description, the armies.
Mm.
And, Jesus, Paul said things like in Romans 15, God will crush Satan under your feet shortly. So I don't know what role we will have.
Mm-hmm.
But, this idea of he's on a white horse, a sword goes out of his mouth, he strikes his enemies. You have passages like that that tend to make you think, okay, that happens like a split second.
Mm-hmm.
And the next day he's sitting on the throne, ruling
Mm-hmm.
his kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
But those extra days at the end of Daniel and like 7 months to find and bury the dead and all that, and Revelation 10 talks about in the days, plural,
Mm-hmm.
of the sounding of the seventh trumpet. So that seventh trumpet is not just a single blast in a moment of time. It's an ongoing blast that may last for days or weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot can happen under the banner of that seventh trumpet.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to rethink all of that. For many years, I taught the general idea of the true triumphal entry at Christ's return. But to work out all the passages and details and problems and everything that's involved with it, just takes, you just got to sit down and work through it. And then then after it kind of becomes evident to you, think, well, I wish I should have seen this go, but anyway, if you end up watching that other video, you see all those passages. I've already retaught too much of it, but it's still fresh in my mind. It was such a blessing to develop it and to present it last night that it's still strong in my thinking of that true triumphal entry is a process of time and events, not just he just doesn't wrap everything up in a 24-hour period.
Right. Yeah. And it's hard to separate because when you've looked at it that way for so many years, and then you start to see the possibility of this being drug out over a course of days or weeks, it's kind of hard to make that shift. But it sure makes a lot better sense than just something instantaneous and it's over in a moment.
Yeah.
There's too many scriptures that would lead you to believe otherwise.
To even answer, well, I won't get into that because I said I'm not going to reteach my lesson from last night. You're going to have to pay the $19.95.
Yes.
You go on and let me and make me be on your, give me your email so I send you daily ads
right.
for other offers.
Yes. Or just spam them to death.
So all of this brings us to, they're down in Edom and they're working their way north and they needed to go through Moab. But king of Moab, Balak, he had heard what they had done to some other peoples and he was afraid and he did not want them to come through his land. But more than that, he didn't just want to refuse them the right to travel through his land. He wanted them cursed. And he hired this mystery prophet. So, we're not given the details, so I don't even know what to say about this, but how did Balak even know about Balaam? If Balaam was from Mesopotamia, it's hundreds of miles away. In the communication of their day, how do you even know about him? Just I'm not quite sure about that.
I would just say that if you have that ability, news travels. It's like the witch of Endor. You have these powers or perceived powers, whatever, and news travels. And of course, that overseeing this whole thing is God bringing these two men together. But like I was saying a moment ago, where the relatives of Israel would not give any acknowledgement as to Israel's specialness. It's almost as if God raised up this guy named Balaam to do that for them on their behalf, because he saw the specialness, and every time he was bribed to curse them, he just came out with another blessing. And this is what the relatives of Israel in that area just refused to acknowledge, that they were a special line of people.
Well, that's why he's a mystery prophet. You wonder if somehow he had a connection to the bloodline of Abraham, who held to a true God or something, because, I know God directed him, but for him to stand up to Balak and say, I'll only speak what God allows me to speak. He had some sort of reverence or recognition of the God of Israel to some degree, or at least God revealed himself to Balaam enough that Balaam knew, I better not go against him. Although Balaam did figure out later, Balaam was part of the plan B to bring the women of Moab into the camp of Israel and cause them to commit fornication and adultery and idol worship. And so he polluted them. He couldn't curse them, so he polluted them.
And it wasn't an all or nothing situation where they had, the Phoenician gods, all their false idols, and not Yahweh, or Yahweh and not the false idols. He was just his name was known among these other gods, and so that was their problem. Is a lot of times Israel got caught trying to worship God along with these other gods, but he's the Most High, as the Bible tells them. So I'm wondering if being from Mesopotamia, like you mentioned, where Abraham was called from, and that we know that they were worshiping the moon gods, that if even among those gods, Yahweh was still known to be a god. And so I'm wondering if that's where Balaam picked up that information and knowledge of Yahweh.
There's more we need to say about Balaam and Balak, I'm sure. But I had said earlier that in his different pronouncements, Balaam made one of the most important, dramatic, visual, emotional, prophetic statements about Christ that is found in the entire Old Testament. And before I get into that, this really lends itself into, okay, God caused Balaam's donkey to talk back to him. That's pretty weird. But there were times God spoke great truth through wicked men and allowed to be put in his Bible. For instance, when Pilate put above the cross, "This is the King of the Jews," he put a great truth up there that evidently he had no personal connection to or belief in. And they said, don't put "He is the King of the Jews," put "He said he is the King of the Jews." What I have written, I have written. And he put it in different languages so that everyone could read it And so people passing by or standing there would see this man being crucified. Who is this? Well, right above his cross it says, "This is the King of the Jews."
Mm-hmm.
So a powerful truth by a wicked man.
Yeah.
I mean, just earlier, the Jewish leaders had held what I call a big council of little men. You know, if we let him live, the whole nation's going to suffer.
Mm-hmm.
And then Caiaphas and Annas, being the head of that group, they said, it is expedient, it is necessary that one man die for the nation.
Mm-hmm.
He spoke a great truth,
Mm-hmm.
but he was a wicked man.
Mm-hmm.
He spoke about the substitutionary death of Christ without knowing it.
Right.
He meant it in an evil way.
Mm-hmm.
But that's one of the best statements about Christ taking our place there is in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And it was part of an evil plot by evil men.
Mm-hmm.
And this one prophetic statement that Balaam said in Numbers 24, it's his fourth prophecy. So he had these series of prophecies, and Balak was getting frustrated, and it's kind of an interesting back and forth between those two men. But in verse 15, he takes up this oracle, it's called this fourth prophecy, the utterance of Balaam, the son of Beor, the utterance of the man whose eyes are opened, the utterance of him who hears the words of God and has the knowledge of the Most High. He has the knowledge of the Most High. So what relationship did Balaam have with the God of Israel?
Mm-hmm.
We can't just push it too far, because he could have united with them, went to Moses and said, "I want to be part of you." But he really didn't obey what Balak wanted.
Mm-hmm.
He's kind of out there on his own, and he was trying to do what was right, and he acknowledges the God Most High. So it's interesting, who sees the vision of the Almighty, who falls down with eyes wide open. So it's almost like he's describing a conversion experience, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I want to go that far, but it seems pretty close. But this verse 17 is one of the great prophetic statements about Christ. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, a scepter shall rise out of Israel, and batter the brow of Moab, and destroy all the sons of tumult. Edom shall be a possession. Seir, his enemy, shall be a possession, while Israel does valiantly. Out of Jacob, one shall have dominion and destroy the remains of the city. That's one of the most beautiful prophetic statements about Christ,
Mm-hmm.
said by a mystery prophet that we just aren't quite sure what to do with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's a continuation. I call this one of the great stepping stone prophecies of the Old Testament leading to Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And you can kind of draw these out, from Genesis 3:15, of course, that seed of the woman will bruise the head of the seed of the serpent. So we call that the first great prophetic statement of the victory of Christ over his enemies. And it's describing what will happen in Revelation 19 when Christ grabs hold of his archenemy, the Antichrist, casts him into the lake of fire. So it describes a victorious one in Genesis 3:15. So right when they sinned, right when everything looked lost and hopeless, and he's saying this to the serpent, but Adam and Eve are listening. Before he issues out the judgment, the punishment, the consequences of their sins, he offers hope. He offers a picture of ultimate victory in the end. As bad as it's going to get, and I'm getting ready to tell you why it's going to be bad. You're going to have sorrow, sweat of your face, pain in childbirth, all sorts of judgments against Adam and Eve. But before he even gets to that, I have already set in place the guarantee that at the end of the story, there's going to be victory over this mess. And it's going to come from a seed of a woman. Of course, that's why it becomes the seed of Abraham. And in Galatians 3, we make that a capital S because he says that's Christ. So that's the victorious one over the seed of the serpent. But how will that be accomplished? See, there's one of the most beautiful gospel messages is in Genesis 3, because you put two verses together, 3:15. Okay, that's the overall picture of the end of the story. But how will it be accomplished? That's why you add verse 21 to it. That he rejected their efforts to cover their sin, and God covered them with the blood of an innocent animal, the skins. How will that one in Genesis 3:15 gain the victory? Through the shed blood of an innocent one. You put those two verses together, you basically have the story of the whole Bible. It's right there. And so that kind of sets things in process to where, like in Genesis 18 and 10, where God promises Abraham a promised son through a miraculous birth. He waited till they were too old, plus she was barren. Hebrews 11 says their body's as good as dead as far as reproduction is concerned. And God purposely waited to give them a son that was a miraculous birth. So you add that to Genesis 3:15 and Genesis 3:21. How will this innocent blood be shed to gain the victory over the seed of the serpent? It's going to come through a miraculous birth. Okay, so you're setting the stage for the virgin birth of Christ. You're laying down the foundation, the principle. And then you get to, of course, that famous we looked at, seems like moons ago, Genesis 49:10, where Jacob is blessing his sons, and he speaks about Judah, and he says, that you're going to rule and until Shiloh comes. And Shiloh, according to the meaning in Ezekiel 21 and 27, means the one whose right it is to rule. So you add that. Why does he have a right to rule? Because he came about from a miraculous birth, an innocent shed blood, and from that he gains the victory over the seed of the serpent. So, I call these stepping stone prophecies, where you can just take just half a dozen, if you want to add them after Numbers 24:17, maybe a dozen total. And you can string these stepping stone prophecies leading up to Christ in a way that makes it very easy to understand, very clear, and just, beautiful. So this is the, another stepping stone here. And he calls him a scepter, and that in Genesis 49, this scepter shall not depart from you until Shiloh comes.
Brother Rick, a thought occurred to me when you brought up Pilate, and of course we're talking about Balaam, but we could maybe look at these as God's unexpected witnesses. We wouldn't have suspected them to have such a testimony for the Most High God, because they're outside of the circle of Israel and outside of the people proper. And where the people proper aren't giving God his credence, his adoration and his exaltation, God's almost as if he's raising up witnesses outside of the covenant people to vouch for God's character and God's promises. So here you have a nation demanding the execution of Jesus, and Pilate, like you said, is saying he's he's your king. That's totally in left field, unexpected. And here you have Balaam doing the same thing. He's vouching for Israel when Israel can't even, well, they failed. They compromised themselves. But here's an outsider seeing more of them than they saw of themselves.
Mm. So Balaam understood more than what the Jews understood to a degree.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
It wasn't, it was to this outsider that God revealed this, one of the most beautiful prophecies of Christ in the whole Bible.
Mm-hmm.
Gave it to him.
And isn't that the story of the Gentiles? Because the Jews rejected him, so I turned to the Gentiles.
You know, all these things, you know, we talked earlier about God has dual or even multiple purposes in everything he does.
Mm-hmm.
Like part of the purpose of Balaam is to show Israel, yes, you are my elect nation. Yes, you are my holy nation. Yes, I plan to work primarily through you, but I am not limited to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I can always accomplish, you know, what Jesus said, if you tell these to be quiet, the stones would cry out.
Yes, yeah. They would be the witnesses.
Yeah.
Even the demons were a witness.
The demons were a witness.
Even the demons were a witness.
Yeah.
He was the Son of God.
Yeah. You know, even like Job, you know, depending on what time period you have Job, some say before Abraham, some say contemporaneous with Abraham, some say a little after. I don't know where you put him. You know, I've not really tried to be dogmatic on that too much.
Yeah, I haven't either.
But again, it's another example of, okay, God's elective purpose was going to be through Abraham and then develop his bloodline and his nation. And that was his, what should we say, his primary vehicle he had in his garage.
Yes.
To further his purposes.
Yeah.
But he had other vehicles in there that he could use once in a while. If nothing else, to show Israel, I am not limited by you. And I can go outside the boundaries of what you demand from me. And it is my purpose at some point to even be more extensive in the inclusion of the Gentiles. So along the way, I'm going to show this by selecting these people that you might not say should be able to do what I do through them. But I'm sovereign. I can do anything I want to.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So it serves all those purposes. Now, as time goes on and the nation develops more completely, then it's a little more like Rahab and Ruth, where they come into the people of Israel to serve the true God.
Yeah.
So, you know, that progression starts confining it a little more closely to the nation. But God's not bound by what we expect or demand of him. So this Balaam pronounces this great prophecy about Christ. And part of this that I read in verse 18 and 19 of Numbers 24 is he also describes these people that you want me to curse are actually going to be, at some point, they're going to conquer you.
Yes.
You're going to be defeated by them.
Yeah.
It's not a message Balak wanted to hear for certain, for sure. Let me see. What else do we want to say about Balaam and Balak? I keep chasing these rabbits.
We're making a stew out of these rabbits.
There is that interesting story when they finally developed that plan to have the women of Moab pollute the nation through the men. And I know this is a touchy subject. Pastors don't really want to get into these kind of things because it's, you got a mixed audience and all sorts of things like that. But whether you're talking about Abraham, whether you're talking about Jacob, whether you're talking about David with his multiple wives and then with Bathsheba, what you're talking about with Israel here, the men of Israel didn't seem to have a strong resistance to the temptation of women who were not their wives. I know Jacob, it was kind of maybe a sanctified thing with 2 wives and 2 concubines. The 12 sons came from. But they seemed more than willing. Judah with Tamar, here's the tribe that Jesus came from. And yet the first set of kids came from a woman dressing up like a harlot. And I think, part of the untold story was she knew Judah would give into it. It wasn't that difficult.
Yeah.
And he saw her and she became pregnant, and, it didn't require much effort on her part, let's put it that way. So I'm so glad that God allows what do we call them? Warts and all. He allows the sins and blemishes of his people to be seen in the Bible because, if everyone was like Joseph and Daniel, we'd all give up, wouldn't we?
Yeah. We wouldn't believe the book was true.
That's not my human nature.
Right.
Joseph and Daniel.
Yeah.
As far as their almost perfect lives, or Job, or a few other examples like that. But we have a lot of the other Bible characters as part of our human nature as well,
as a good balance.
And so this plan B of Balak and Balaam to pollute them through the Moabite women didn't seem to take that much effort.
Yeah.
It worked pretty easily.
Yeah.
And of course, God was angry with them again. Moses was angry and everything. But I love that story in 25 and 7. After Moses said in verse 5, Moses said to the judges of Israel, "Every one of you kill his men who were joined to Baal of Peor." And indeed, one of the children of Israel came and presented to his brethren a Midianite woman, the sight of Moses, the sight of all the congregation, children of Israel, who were weeping at the door of the tabernacle meeting. In other words, this was kind of a in your face.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I'm doing, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's a very defiant move. He wasn't just showing her; he was showing them he could do it.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't do much about it.
Yeah.
So the sin of pride and greed and lust and idolatry and all of it had taken hold of them.
Brother Rick, I'm thinking that when you don't see yourself as God sees you, and you don't see all the potential and blessings that he has arranged for you to receive, when you don't see yourself in that light as God sees you, you're really setting yourself up for the compromise that we see here with Balaam. He was able to do this because Israel, I don't think, fully appreciated who they were. And so I see that today. People backslide, they fall out of church. If they only realize what the Lord has in store for his people, to present her as a chaste bride, present her, without fault, if they could only see and appreciate all that God has in store for our covenant people, I think they would be more on guard against these openings or these vulnerable areas, because they have their mindset and their their vision on the city and on being inside that city. And when you have that, and that's a strong motivation, you're going to be more on guard against these Moabite women in your life. These temptations to cause you to go back into the world. Well, but if you don't see it or appreciate yourself as a covenant person, boy, you're going to fall. You're going to fall. And I think they lost sight of who they were.
In this great story, in the midst of all that, before God killed 24,000 in the plague, Phineas, he's one of my heroes. He's one of my, I love to preach on what I call unsung heroes.
Mm-hmm.
The minor characters, the ones not much is said about, but what is said is terrific.
Yeah.
And this Phineas in verse 7, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, saw it. He rose from among the congregation, took a javelin in his hand. He went after the man of Israel into the tent, thrust both of them through, the man of Israel and the woman through her body.
Mm-hmm.
So the plague was stopped among the children of Israel. So he took the matter in hand. He saw the evil that was being done. He knew that it was a violation of God's will.
Mm-hmm.
And he practiced capital punishment himself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because they had been given the 10 Commandments, and it was a capital offense. What was taking place in Phineas, this priest, put this javelin through both of them. I mean, that had to be a pretty dramatic scene. And even much later, in Psalm 106, it's looking back at that event, and it says, verse 30, Psalm 106:30, then Phineas stood up and intervened, and the plague was stopped, and that was accounted to him for righteousness to all generations forevermore. So it was a righteous thing that he did. It's not murder, it was justice. And it's interesting that exact phrase used about Abraham in Genesis 15:6 that Paul grabs hold of in Romans 4 is said about a man doing a righteous deed. So it wasn't speaking about his initial salvation, as most people apply Romans 4 to that phrase. It was accounted to him for righteousness. And Phineas, it was said about him killing these two people. So, you bring that up to people, and that really adds a additional interesting mix to the whole discussion. Justification, being accounted for righteousness in God's eyes. There is, in some way, an application to our life after we're saved of that principle.
I look at the whole thing as, in the New Testament, as God wanted to winnow the nation, and he was after the wheat, but he made it very clear that the chaff would if they remained as chaff and didn't become as wheat, they would be of no use to him, because he's on his way to Zion. He's on his way to establishing this righteous government. And it's like, who's with me? And so all throughout Israel's history, we see him winnowing these people and challenging them to believe. Like, so the Levites stepped up and killed how many of their brethren? 3,000. God was serious. Look, people, I have a plan for you, and you're either on board or you're not. And so he showed through Phineas and through the Levites and the many, plagues and times that he killed, thousands of people with the serpents and everything else, that, look, I'm serious about this. I called you out. I separated you as my people for a reason. And you either get it or you don't. You either catch on to this theme or you don't. And if you don't, well, you're just going to be on the outs. And so all throughout their history, we see this winnowing factor and on into the New Testament as well.
Yeah, this seemed to be such a defiant act by this man taking
Mhm.
this Moabite woman
Mhm.
side of all of them and kind of showing off
Mhm.
what he was doing.
Mhm.
Uh, that God allowed Phineas to react in like kind.
Mhm.
Okay, you're going to do something so open and dramatic. I'm going to do something
Mhm.
in like manner,
Mhm.
opposite of that in
Mhm.
judgment.
Mhm.
And we're not really told the rest of the story about Phineas in detail, although he was a leader of their their soldiers later. I think that's 31:6 of Numbers talks about him being in charge of some men in a battle. But can you imagine what people thought of Phineas?
Mm.
Don't mess with that man.
Yes, yes.
Would he have been? How would he have been treated? I mean, it says because of what he did, the plague was stopped. So actually, what he did saved a lot of lives. But did they in some way want to blame him, for all
Mhm.
those who died in the plague? Knowing human nature, they probably did. Uh, but some would see, man, this man's a hero.
Yes.
And he's one of my unsung heroes in the Bible. What else do we want to say about Balaam and Balak? We didn't go into a whole lot of detail. We may want to refresh our minds and do a little bit of it next session before we let's see, where are we at in Numbers that leads us from there? Are we ready to go in Deuteronomy yet, or we still have some more that we have to?
Let's put it out to our listeners and see if there's something in this story that they would like us to maybe develop, or maybe they've developed something that.
That is a good thought, Mike. I'm sure someone who watches this will say, I have researched it, I've developed lessons and sermons from it.
Mhm.
I want to go into some more detail. Let me come on next session and let me talk about it some.
Yeah.
Are there any takers out there?
Hmm.
We would gladly allow you to do that.
Now we know Brother Braden Barnum is going to take us up on this. We're just wondering if, in addition to Brother Braden, if there's someone else.
We're not going to let him up, are we?
No, we're not.
I've not heard from him from our last session. I have a feeling someone has made known to him, and imagine he's listened. I don't know if he watches. I think he mainly listens.
Oh, listen, yeah.
So he may not see what you wrote in the under
Oh,
the title in the description.
yes.
So Braden, if you are listening to this and you did not go look at the actual video in the description that your Uncle Mike, your dearly beloved Uncle Mike, wrote in there, then you go take a look at it.
Yes. Oh,
We're praying for their annual meeting coming up in a
mhm.
few weeks.
Yeah.
Your eldest son will be one of the speakers,
Yes.
as
Yes.
well as Ryan Miller.
Yeah.
So 1-2 punch.
Yes. 1, 2. Yeah.
Yeah, that's going to be a good meeting. I look forward to going and listening to both of them.
They have a theme this year. I don't know if they have one every year, but where there's no vision, the people perish.
Oh, is that the theme?
Hmm. Yeah. So I'm pretty sure we'll hear some good thoughts on that.
No, that's good.
Yeah.
Well, we'll stop our part for today. Thank you all.
Yes. Thank you all.
Emails added to this, and if you want to contact us, feel free. If you want to leave some remarks, give a thumbs up. I mean, we're ecstatic when we see 2 or 3 likes,
Yes.
on a video, much less the comments. We're easily pleased. So
We are up to 122 subscribers, though. I don't know if you
are
noticed
we?
that. Yes. Yeah.
Listen, out of you 122 subscribers, that'll be one of you that wants to come on and present one of these lessons yourself. We'll join in. We'll make some remarks. We'll kind of lead it along if you're kind of worried about actually being able to do it properly. As you can see, we're not overly concerned
No.
with a flow of thought being exact and perfect.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know, I hope that the way we approach this encourages others, so that you look at us and you say, man, if they can do it, anyone can do it.
Yes, right. Yeah. We are anything but polished and buffed. But we sure enjoy it.
Hair shiny, and maybe I did buff. Polished and buffed.
Polished and buffed.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Brother Rick. We'll see you next time.
Okay, Mike.